Welcome to Horn Takes Live. I am Sean Redfearn, and I am joined tonight again by Erick Henry of Horns247. Doing tonight, Erick?
Sean, my man, as always, appreciate you extending the invite. Always a pleasure to hop on with y'all.
Absolutely. We love having you on the show as well. These offensive position group rankings tonight, headed into the 2025 spring game type season, the spring football thing. How and this is no particular order. I just want to throw out we're talking O-line, pass catchers. I include the wide receivers, tight end, running backs. So I got groups. How do you 2025 headed into the spring at least?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just kind of start. When you threw out the topic in my head, I was like, all right, how do I kind of want to rank these, right? And I'm going to try to rank them. So I am going to start with the running backs first. I think, and we talked a little bit about this when I was with you and CJ Vogel last week. I think it was last week. I feel more confident heading into spring in this defense, right? Anytime you can start a defense with Anthony Hill, Colin Simmons, Michael Taft, three perennial All-Americans, you're in good shape. Offensively, it still feels a little bit like a wait-and-see game, right? But I'm going to start with the position group that I think is, in my mind, the strongest entering spring, and that's the running backs. Now, I say all that, Sean, and say this grade that I'm going to give, and I'm going to go with an A-, is contingent upon CJ Baxter coming back, being 100%, not just physically, but mentally, all right? We all know anyone who has suffered an injury playing sports or just, really doing anything athletically or physically, it takes a while to kind of get your mental back from that. You're talking about a running back in this case who, his entire game is built on having confidence in his ability to cut and turn and do the things that CJ Baxter does. So if he can come back and be, let's just call it, not even for spring, let's just call it by the time, August 30th rolls around, 90% of what he was at his fully, being fully healthy, I got it as an A-. I start with CJ Baxter and Quintravion Wisner. I still think that is a top-notch duo in the SEC, right? We didn't get a chance to see it with CJ Baxter and Jaden Blue this year because of the injury. But I think with the way that Trey Wisner has stepped up, a lot of the, I don't want to say complaint, but the observation has been, well, you don't have a burner in the backfield, right? With Jaden Blue being gone and some of the guys returning. I still think, and I'll put CJ out of this for a second, listen, Trey Wisner showed the ability to rip off some big runs. It wasn't necessarily, all the time, right? But I think he's shown the ability. So for an offense that I think the biggest issue in the run game was consistency, picking up 4 or 5 yards as needed, staying on schedule. I'm not too worried about the chunk play, right? I think they'll find that. Steve Sarkisian's offense have shown an ability to find the chunk play. So I think if you can get CJ, Trey Wisner, Jarrett Gibson, Christian Clark, get those guys going, maybe a transfer to be named. You never know. I feel at their peak, they can be an A-. But again, that's contingent upon CJ. Then I kind of want to go to the wide receiver room. That I kind of, if I'm giving a grade, I went with a solid B. I think Ryan Wingo, and I wrote this, Sean, all of the headlines go to Jeremiah Smith and, Ryan Williams and to a lesser extent, TJ Moore out of Clemson, right, in terms of true freshmen who came in and made an impact. If Ryan Wingo had the amount of targets that Jeremiah Smith had, that Ryan Williams had, you'd be talking about him in that same stratosphere, all right? Ryan Wingo only had 55 targets last year. You're talking about a guy in Jeremiah Smith who had just under 100. I think he crossed 100 with that national title game, right? He's, in my mind, ready to be a bona fide number one receiver. I think he can do that. I think DeAndre Moore, primed for a breakout year. I know he kind of emerged this year, struggled with the drops, was tied for the team lead in drops with 5, but a guy who's shown, in that J-Witt role, right? A guy who's going to be that blocker, going to do the dirty work, do the tough things. But I think DeAndre Moore, sneaky as a solid route runner, a guy who gets open, make plays down the field, right? Now, where things kind of get tricky is in my mind, I do think they need to add a transfer receiver. That's not to say that they can't depend on a Khalil Lockett or a Jamie French, who, when you talk to our guys at 24/7, Sean, they kind of say that Khalil Lockett is, quote unquote, the better player, but they think that Jamie French is maybe more ready to step in immediately and make an impact, right? But Steve Sarkisian has been a little bit resistant to go to freshman receivers. We know that, right? So we're going to see how that plays out. But I like the group as is, and I'm just going to grade it based on what they have in spring, right? So I'll give that a solid B. I give quarterback a B. And that's not to say that I don't have high hopes for Arch Manning. First-time starter, you got to do it on a full-time basis in the SEC. I think Arch is going to have a great year. I've been toying around with the idea of kind of projecting what Arch's numbers could be, but it's so hard to do that based on what you saw from him this past year, because his starts came, or his start came against a bottom barrel SEC team, Mississippi State, Louisiana Monroe, and of course was inserted against UTSA, right? So it's not like you will have, even like a Kentucky or a Vandy or something like that to kind of project forward. But I think Arch Manning is going to have an excellent year. I just want to see the way things come together with this offensive line that I'll get to in a second. That's certainly being revamped. With the, as you talked about with the pass catchers, actually I'll touch on the tight ends as well, because I forgot you're grouping both of those in. I still would go B. I'd feel a little bit better if Amari Niblack were returning. Amari Niblack was essentially going to be the starter this year. Like it wasn't really, not to say there wasn't going to be a competition with him and Jordan Washington and others, but he was going to be the guy this year. He chooses to go to A&M. We'll see how that plays out. Still got to feel high on Jordan Washington, but it kind of plays into the theme of what I was talking about with the pass catchers and that, inexperience. And I want to see with Arch Manning kind of how those guys can all meld together, right? At least the positive for Horns fans is Arch has a lot of reps with those second team guys, right? Because that's who he was practiced with during the year. And last, in terms of the offensive line, I'm going to go B- right now. Again, don't be alarmed. These are just the grades that come off the top of my head as you're entering spring ball. I could come back after spring and say, all right, we've seen a little bit of NATO. We've seen a little bit of Brandon Baker, of Daniel Cruz, of Trevor Gooseby. We know DJ Campbell's going to kind of be, going to have to step up and be that anchor, right? What does this offensive line look like, right? Is it, in my mind, I like Gooseby at left tackle. I like NATO at tackle. You guys didn't go DJ Campbell right guard. Do you maybe go Cole Hudson at center, right? He's played a little bit of, everywhere on the interior of the offensive line. Do you go him at left guard and go Cruz at center, right? And just go super young. We'll see. I do think this will be the year again that Texas has to dip into the portal with an offensive lineman. And, this is something I feel really strongly about, and I'll pass it back to you on this, Sean. I'm a big believer. Anyone I've talked to, whether it's former offensive line coaches, just listen, I was a former Division II player, so I am not, by any means some offensive line expert, but just, my belief is when it comes to the portal and it comes to linemen, Steve Sarkisian and Kyle Flood have this thing right. You can't portal an offensive line. Go ask Oklahoma when they tried to do that, right? The reason for that is, especially in today's day and age with the portal and NIL and guys moving around, you're an offensive lineman and you've had 3-4 position coaches in your career. That's a mental position. That's a mental spot. That's mental and technique. You can't have 3, 4, 5 guys trying to teach you technique. You can clean up technique, I think, in my mind. You bounce around a little bit as a quarterback, right? Because you can get the right guy in there. But when you've had multiple voices in your head as a guard, as a tackle, as a center, that to me is tricky. So I do think this is the year they dip into the portal and get an offensive lineman, but it's not going to be 3 or 4 or 5 guys. You can't portal an offensive line, and they do an excellent job developing their offensive line.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you kind of you took a different than 1 through just to just to say this is how I think we are coming into spring, which is fine. Good insight. I like to hear the order I had mine in versus the order you had. You first. I had running backs. It's because of the uncertainty, and neither think it's a perspective on it. You did and say this is with CJ back and with CJ Baxter being healthy. I know that, and I don't know that we can know that probably until August. I mean, I know he's walking around a knee brace on. That's probably I don't know. I've never tore mine, so I don't know how long you got to wear a knee brace post surgery. I kind of what we know today, and I like the talent in the running back room. You get Trey Wisner back. You got Jarrett Gibson had like almost 400 yards himself, 4th year.
Yeah.
So he showed he could play. He did it in some big games. I thought what he came in and did against Michigan in that game was pretty ballsy for a freshman. Michigan on the road and did some really good things in that game. But Baxter and Clark injury, and I think we've got to be able to find a running back somewhere. I think you and I and CJ were talking about we got to find somebody big because size back there. We need that thing. We've got the Lightning, and we had Lightning all year. Jerry Gibson, I think, runs a little big. And a Trey Wisner, still not a very big guy. I think he's probably playing as maybe 210, something like that. Definitely big in the trunks, in the legs, but still, just running backs that even running backs. You look, that's a big dude. You looked at Henderson, but jacked. I mean, it's a ball of humanity coming at you that's tough to tackle, right? So I had them last. I had you went to receiver second, right? That's kind of how I got that second. And I really like Ryan Wingo, and touched on that. They had 929 yards, 9 touchdowns between them last year, which is really good coming into this year before Steve Sarkisian and grabbed his 3 wide receivers out of the 100 and touchdown, or maybe 0 touchdowns coming back as an area. And you touched on it. Tight end, I think that'll be Jordan Washington. I think I mentioned that. I loved his high school film. I like to see that he's gotten a lot bigger. I mean, he's playing. They've got him listed at 250 pounds. He's putting in some work while he's been here at Texas. And interesting, you talked Khalid Lockett, you talked Jamie French. I'm curious what guys like Aaron Butler, Parker Livingstone, they finally, for Ryan Niblett, third year in the program, can he kind of step up, and can he do some things that he hasn't been able to do so far this year? And then you look at a guy like Aaron Butler, recruiting, he was a worthy type of guy. A lot of people said, man, this can he get on the field? But then Parker Livingstone, he's a fast guy too, and he's got the size that you like to see at a wide receiver. So, the wide one thing, and I've told people this before, I don't think I will ever worry about wide receivers as long as Steve Sarkisian is the coach at Texas. That they seem to recruit at a very, very then I went to the O-line, and I kind of different, same names. A lot of this maybe be a little different than you had. Good think will be the left tackle. I think he when they needed him in A&M. And then the very next week, he jumps over to right tackle to he got a start at the SEC. I believe he got a start against Clemson. Yes, or did he start against Arizona State?
It's the start against Clemson, yes.
Okay.
No, or so, no, Arizona State.
Okay. Yeah, that's right, because Cam went down against Clemson. So he's a guy really well. I think against Texas A&M, he was the highest rated pass blocker offensive line, according to PFF. Good stuff out of him. I like Neto Umar. He's that big body, 6'4", 330 pounds, I think is what he so he's like a big, like, road grader type. If he can, if he can learn the playbook and whatever's been holding him back to this point, which is honest, probably just the fact that there's been some guys that have more experience. So it'll be real if he can slip in there at left guard. I like Cole Hudson, maybe Daniel Cruz's film. Yes. Idea how that's going to translate to think. I think probably offensive line is the hardest thing to grade coming out of. They're generally so much bigger, so much stronger. They can look really good on film, and I think you can miss things. And And then I think the varying level of competition that some of them play against. You look at a guy like Campbell and DJ Campbell, who's probably definitely going to be the right guard this year. So why wouldn't he? He's a guy from Duncanville. Those guys played some hosses. I mean, they played some big time defensive linemen. So I think offensive line hard to project. So it'll be see to me if those younger guys that I've really liked some of their film, if they can pop up. And then I like kind of the heir apparent on the right side. Possibly he did get some playing time this year. You look at like Brandon Baker, they didn't play a lot. Trevor Gooseby, a little guy that's been in the program forever and has a ton of 13 starts. And then DJ Campbell's your old man with 30 starts, I believe, total. I went QB, well, and I had QB number one. And I have QB number one. I just think that room is so good. I like Arch for almost 1,000, 9 touchdowns in his opportunities this year. I loved the spring game. I loved what we in game for a freshman to come in the way he did and just kind of sling the pill around. 228 yards, 3 touchdowns in that. And then you got KJ Lacey, who's going to come in and probably compete. Jones is going to be your 2 guy next year. KJ Lacey may come in but you're talking about a guy there that just won what is it? Alabama all football. Mr. Football in Alabama. He almost set the single or the career, passing yards 10,000. I think he was just a few yards from setting the thing again. So I like that QB room, and I like Steve Sarkisian, and I like start talking about can we get a quarterback. So I liked what you did though. I liked how you gave them grades. And maybe our approach was just a little different. But I think when you look at this team coming in, there's a lot of stuff to be optimistic about. But maybe optimistic. What are your thoughts on that? And then I know you got to get out of here. So whenever you got to drop, let me know.
Yeah, no, see, and that's the thing. If anyone hears these grades and they're like, oh, man, you feel that's a little low. That's the way I tend to approach spring ball, right? Especially when you're dealing with players who have played a ton of football. Cautiously optimistic, right? Because you're essentially doing what you've done when you've taken players from high school and you're trying to project what they can do in college. Now you're trying to project guys who may have, competed a little bit for, special teams or competed for, a third string spot and see how are they going to project when they now are in the line of fire and trying to compete for starting roles, right? Want to touch on 2 things you mentioned real quick. One with offensive line play, I am in complete agreement with you. It's something I'm super passionate about. And this is the example I like to use. I'm from Florida, right? Florida, in terms of high school coaching, not quite Texas, right? And I'm not shading high school coaches in Florida. What I'm saying is it's not a full-time job. I had, when I was covering college football in Florida, I had an offensive line coach who I trust, veteran G5 guy. He's actually been, at North Carolina. He's had some stops at a couple power schools as well, saying that for the most part, he liked to recruit his offensive linemen when he was coaching at this school in Florida from outside the state if he could, because you have full-time coaches in Alabama, in Georgia, in Texas. Your offensive line coach, maybe they teach at the school, but they're the offensive line coach, right? In Florida, Sean, the offensive line coach, he's getting off his shift at Jiffy Lube or getting out of his chair at the barbershop and then coming to coach football, right?
Right.
So I say all that to say the level of coaching that you get is just vastly different, right? So to your point about kind of projecting offensive line, I'm sure it's the same thing even here at Texas. If you go in Texas, if you go from, what's the lowest here, like 1A, if memory serves me correct, or that lowest level going up to Duncanville, right, which is a 6. I know they're in the top tier. Obviously, the level of coaching and the level of talent you face there is different. So I'm in complete agreement with you there on the offensive line. Did want to touch on the receivers again real quick. Parker Livingstone is a guy who I think everyone needs to keep their eye on. I mean, 6'5", 6'6", he is fast. he can be that deep threat. And to have a bigger guy who can come in and be that deep threat, I think that's something to keep an eye on as well. You talked about getting a bigger body in the run game. I will just say this. I don't necessarily disagree with you. I'm a big believer that, sometimes you got to run behind your pads. You got to run physical. Look at Jonathan Brooks. I mean, JB was probably about 215. Was not a small man by any stretch of imagination, but he wasn't 230, 235. But Jonathan Brooks, as you well know, and Longhorn fans know, that dude finished his runs. Every time he finished a run, he was going forward, getting that extra yard or two. It's one of the things that prior to CJ Baxter's injury, I was looking to see, because in my conversations with CJ, he said he was kind of working on that. Like, hey, not just when you're coming out of Edgewater High and you're facing kids who, my neck of the woods are going to be going to Valencia Community College next year. You're just bigger, faster, and stronger than everybody else. You go take it 80 yards to the house. He told me, especially leading up to that Iowa State, the Iowa State game was his first start after TCU when JB got hurt in 2023, saying that he was really working on finishing his runs, running behind his pads. So I do think that's something, again, we'll see whether it's CJ or, as you talked about, Jarrett Gibson, Christian Clark, not the biggest in terms of size, but you look at the lower half, they got it. They have that ability there as well. And I would agree with you on the quarterback room. Again, I give it that grade because of the inexperience, but ain't lacking no talent. Yeah, as you said, as long as Steve Sarkisian's in Austin, you're going to have good quarterbacks. You're going to have good receivers.
Absolutely. Eric, I know you got to get out of here. Appreciate you joining us. Everybody go to Erick C. Henry _ right there on Twitter. You can also find, he does a lot of content, a lot of articles over on Horns247. He's also bouncing around the circuit of podcasts and things like that. He'll keep you updated on his Twitter account, who he's talking to next, but he does a lot of good work. Eric, appreciate it. Have a good night. Thank you, sir.
Anytime, my man.
All right, I'm not leaving you, though, folks. We're going to talk about the state of the Lone Star Showdown rivalry. So I'm flipping through Twitter the other day. Well, before we do that, let me back up. I wrote an article on SEC Unfiltered talking about all this stuff, how I rated these guys. You can go check it out at secunfiltered.com. Click on the little Texas Longhorn logo at the top. It'll be probably the very first article. It may be maybe one or two down. But anyway, I'm Sean Redfearn. So find all the Sean Redfearn articles. Check those things out. Let me know what you think. By the way, you can find me at Horn Takes, obviously, with the podcast, but you can also find me at Sean _Redfearn. Give us a follow. We'd appreciate it. Now we'll move on to this state of the Texas and Aggie rivalry business. I saw JD Pickle ask this on Twitter the other day. What is the state of the Texas and Aggie rivalry? And the only thing I can think, I like to speak through GIFs a lot, and I call them GIFs. Y'all might call them GIFs. I don't give a damn. The only thing I could think of was like the scene from The Office where Dwight says, are you serious? Because that's how dumb of a question. What do you mean, what is the state of the Lone Star Showdown rivalry? If you're a Texas A&M Aggie, it is not very good. That's the state. That's the constant state. It hasn't changed in multiple years. It probably will not change in multiple years. Check this out, folks. We'll start with football. We'll go to basketball, and then we'll talk some baseball. And I'm just going to do the three major men's sports here. And by the way, A&M has had a 13-year head start in the SEC over Texas. And they're still behind. They run from Texas. They go to the SEC. And I think it paid some dividends early on, if nothing else than to sort of cripple Texas a little bit from a recruiting perspective. But it never really helped Texas A&M. And I think you see comments now on Twitter that'll just rip comments off of TexAgs and post them under his account. That's basically, and you're starting to see some of these guys finally getting it. Like, we didn't help ourselves, and we didn't hurt Texas enough. So 13-year head start in the SEC, and Texas does what Texas A&M could not do, has not ever done. Texas won. They win the regular season SEC, and I know there's not a title for it, but they have the best record in the and they go and play in the SEC title game. Texas also goes into Texas A&M and beats Texas A&M. And I know the score was 17-7, folks, but that was a shit kicking. That game so much worse than what the scoreboard said. It's on the board. We talk about how some in a specific area or dominate in a lot of specific areas and still even lose. Texas dominated A&M in College Station, and they got out of there with a 17-7 win. Even that close. The all-time record, folks, for Texas, 37 wins for Texas wins 65% of the games in football. And I've said this a lot of times. If one team wins 2/3 of the game, and that's basically what Texas does in football. Texas wins this game 2/3 of the Texas 12-5 over back to 1996 when they joined the Big 12 together. So in football, there is no state of the rivalry. Texas A&M spelled out right there in what I just told you. Basketball. This one might be more embarrassing for A&M fans. We split in year one of the SEC with Aggie being ranked in the top 15 most of the season. Texas unranked. Blew a 22-point lead in the game. Texas came back and won. If you're an A&M fan or a player or anybody that has anything to do with the basketball program, that had the biggest nut punch games on the planet like your life ever. It does not get much worse than a 22-point lead. I believe it was 20 at halftime. And by the way, that is one of the only Texas games I have even tuned into for basketball this year. Basketball guy, I've told you guys that before. And it's the only one I watched all the way through. And I'll be honest with you guys, when it was whatever it was at halftime, I went and grabbed my computer, started working on the computer, doing some, but I kept the game on in the background. I almost turned it off. I kept it on in the background because I kind of looked up from my computer at some point, and I was like, holy shit, they got a chance. I think they were within like 8 points, 12 points, something like that. 10, 12, 8 points with 10 minutes left, 12 minutes left in the second half. And I was like, man, Texas actually has a shot. I got to be honest, I didn't think they would do it, but I was like, they got a shot. They've definitely cut into a big lead. Texas leads this all-time series against Texas A&M, 138 wins to only 87 losses. And they're 28-9 against Texas A&M basketball going back to 1996. 61% of the time they win this game in basketball. So not close, folks. Maybe that's a little more rivalry-y. But I don't know. Like, they just haven't done anything against Texas in either one of those sports in the last, almost 30 years. Baseball on one hand, on the other hand, rather, Texas A&M, this is probably the only one where they've enjoyed some success. And I think, at least here lately, you could legitimately call the baseball rivalry the Lone Star Showdown rivalry. And you could question what the state of the Texas and Aggie rivalry. You could question that in baseball. It's a 240 to 131 with 5 ties all-time record against. Historically, we're pushing that 2/3 thing in football, not a rivalry. 45-31, though, however, going back to both join the Big 12. And then you look here recently, the last 10 meetings, Texas, including they did get to eliminate Texas in the 2022 series. So Texas A&M has had success against Texas in baseball. I got to wonder how long that will last. I mean, say what you want about 7 of the last 10 for Texas A&M in baseball. It's just stole their coach the day after they played for a national championship. With who was on with Mark from Occupy Left Field last week. And I said, man, that's got to be like the most gangster. Or maybe I was with Harge or Mark. It's got to be like the most gangster thing an AD can do is your biggest rival's coach the day after they just played in a national championship. I don't think a lot of people realize how crazy that actually is. So JD Pickle, there is no state of showdown rivalry. It's still very lopsided. Big Brother is back. So much so that Texas A&M fans are talking about let's do Big Ten and let's make the Big Ten put something in. Texas will never be in the Big Ten because there was some sort of gentleman that the SEC would never bring Texas in. I highly doubt. I don't think anybody. You don't get to the position you're at, like running the SEC by making that deal or making those kind of promises. Oh, we will never. This doesn't make sense to me. I think that's made up. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll admit it. I'll do it on this show. So yeah, there is no state of the lone rivalry, JD Pickle. It's just bad. And the state is really sad if you're a Texas A&M Aggie. Henry of Horns247 on the show a little earlier. You guys make sure you go out to X, check him out, Erick C. Score. You can also find him over at Horns247, writes a lot of articles, does a job over there. So you guys go check him out. You could check us out at Twitter, TikTok, Horn Takes, and also Sean _Redfearn, and I'll throw that up on the screen because that's a weird name. My personal Twitter. And here is the podcast Twitter. And then here recently, we became a contributor at SEC Unfiltered. We're writing a little baseball, football articles. Head on over to secunfiltered.com. You can check them out on Twitter at SEC Unfiltered. Tons of good content. Lots of team content coming. They're in the process of bringing some guys on. That's how I got pulled in there. And I've done a lot of stuff with Chris and those guys in the past on video, what we're doing today, what we're doing tonight. I have a blast with those guys every time. I'm really excited about the opportunity. I've never done any kind of writing like that. So good opportunity for me to write a bunch of articles. I get to write as much as I want. It's good stuff. So check us out over there. Click on the little Longhorn tab and you'll see a whole lot of stuff from Sean Redfearn over at secunfiltered.com. Check us out on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube at Horn Takes as well. You guys have a good night. Y'all get hooked.